He woke up before the sun, the gray light seeping through the cracked blinds of his tiny apartment. A place so small and worn that the walls seemed to close in on him, suffocating with the weight of unpaid bills and missed opportunities. Every morning felt like a fight he hadn't signed up for, a battle he had no weapons for, yet one he could not avoid. His pockets were empty, his fridge almost as bare as his hopes, and every corner of his life reminded him of the gap between what he wanted and what he had. Walking to the bus stop, he passed rows of shiny coffee shops and bustling offices, a world that seemed to exist just out of reach, a life of comfort and abundance he had no access to. The laughter of strangers, the smell of fresh bagels and roasted coffee, the sight of families enjoying breakfasts he couldn't afford, it all weighed on him like a reminder of his failures, or at least what others would see as failures. He had tried jobs before, countless interviews that ended with polite smiles and shaking heads, the cold rejection cutting deeper than any winter wind that whipped through the city streets. Every paycheck barely covered rent, leaving nothing for savings, nothing for small joys, nothing for dreams. Some nights, he would stare at the ceiling of his dim apartment, counting the tiny cracks and imagining how much brighter life could be, if only he had a chance. The electric meter ran low, threatening to cut power, and the refrigerator hummed with emptiness, a constant reminder of the fragility of his situation. Friends and family meant well, but their advice often felt like gentle reminders of his limitations. Just get a stable job. Don't dream too big, they'd say, as if his ambition was a crime or a sin. But deep inside, a stubborn spark refused to die, a small voice insisting that he could rise above this, that he could do more, that he could earn everything he had ever imagined. On the bus, he would watch people scrolling on their phones, smiling at memes, planning vacations, sipping lattes, and he felt a pang of envy mixed with determination. He wasn't angry at them, he was angry at the circumstances that made it harder for him to get a foot in the door, harder to even start climbing the ladder that seemed so effortless for others. Each step he took in those cold streets carried not just his body, but the weight of dreams he hadn't yet realized, the burden of all the small things that poverty stole, a night out with friends, a fresh haircut, even the simple comfort of knowing tomorrow would be okay. He had learned to stretch $1 until it screamed, to cook meals from scraps, to patch shoes and clothing, to endure discomfort without complaint, and yet, no matter how much he adapted, the world seemed to move faster than he could keep up. He kept a notebook filled with scribbles of ideas and ambitions, though most of the pages were empty, like his stomach some mornings, waiting for inspiration, waiting for opportunity. At night, he walked the streets under flickering streetlights, watching the neon signs of stores he could never afford, imagining himself owning something, anything, and dreaming of the day when a morning like this wouldn't fill him with dread but with purpose. He had friends who were trying to build lives too, struggling alongside him, but each one seemed to stumble under the same weight, and the comparison sometimes crushed him, yet at other times fueled the tiny ember of hope that refused to go out. He thought about what success would look like, what it would feel like to finally not have to worry about rent or bills, to have food on the table and a roof over his head without constantly counting pennies, to feel freedom instead of fear. And yet, every time he reached for that dream, reality slapped his hands away, delayed payments, broken buses, long hours, and endless paperwork, all conspiring to make him feel smaller than he was, to make him doubt whether he could ever escape. But that spark, stubborn and defiant, kept whispering, reminding him that even in the darkest nights, even when the city slept around him and he walked alone, he still had dreams, and dreams were stronger than any wall, any paycheck, any rejection. He remembered seeing stories online, videos of people rising from nothing, and they weren't superhumans. They were ordinary people who refused to quit, who decided that their struggles would not define them. And that realization cut through the despair. If they could do it, why couldn't he? So, he pushed through another day, another interview, another bus ride, another small rejection, knowing that each step, no matter how painful, was part of a journey that could lead somewhere better. And though the nights were long and the cold seeped into his bones, though hunger gnawed at him and doubt whispered that maybe it wasn't worth it, he held on to the stubborn belief that if he kept moving, if he kept dreaming, eventually he could earn everything, not handed to him, but built with his own hands, one painstaking step at a time, and maybe, just maybe, the world would finally see him not as a poor man, but as someone who dared to rise, someone who refused to be defined by what he didn't have. The morning sunlight poured through the cracked window, warming the edges of his tiny apartment, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of possibility stir inside him, a feeling that maybe the endless struggle could lead somewhere. If only he dared to imagine it. He opened his worn notebook, the pages filled with scribbles and half-formed ideas, and began to write with a seriousness that felt almost sacred, sketching out plans for a future he had never allowed himself to truly believe in before, ideas for small businesses, side hustles, online work, anything that could turn the tide of his life. And as he wrote, he let his mind wander to the city skyline he could see from his window, imagining himself walking confidently through streets that had once seemed impossible, doors opening instead of slamming shut, opportunities waiting instead of passing by. Each line in the notebook felt like a spark, each sentence a small declaration that he would no longer be a prisoner of circumstance. And though fear and doubt still lingered, threatening to smother the tiny flame of hope, he refused to let them win, because he had learned that dreams alone weren't enough. They needed action, persistence, and courage, and for the first time, he felt ready to take the first step, no matter how small. He spent hours watching online tutorials, reading articles, learning skills he had never thought he could master. From basic coding to social media marketing, from budgeting to negotiation, every bit of knowledge another brick in the foundation of the life he was determined to build. And sometimes it was overwhelming, the sheer amount of work required, but he reminded himself that nothing worth achieving ever came easy, and that the people he admired most, those who had risen from nothing to success, had all faced far greater challenges and refused to quit. Friends and family sometimes laughed at his enthusiasm, telling him to be practical, to get a real job, and stop wasting time dreaming, but he smiled through their skepticism, knowing that their doubts were not chains, but challenges to break. And he resolved to prove, first to himself and then to the world, that he could turn imagination into reality. At night, when the city slept, he would walk along quiet streets with his notebook in hand, staring at neon signs and imagining a future where those lights shone on him not as a spectator, but as someone who had made it, someone who had earned every dollar, every opportunity, every small victory. The first attempt at earning something on his own was awkward, clumsy, and almost laughable, but it was a start. He posted freelance services online, unsure if anyone would hire him, crafting proposals with trembling hands, feeling a mix of hope and terror with every send click. And when the first reply came, a tiny job that paid barely enough for a meal, he felt a surge of pride that outweighed the meager amount. Because it was proof that his ideas, his dreams, were not just fantasies, they could lead to real results if he kept moving, kept learning, kept believing. Days turned into weeks, and with each small win, his confidence grew. The job that once seemed impossible to land now became a stepping stone to another. And the failures that had once crushed him now became lessons, each rejection teaching him how to refine his approach, how to work smarter, how to persevere, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the man who had been invisible to opportunity began to shape his own path, a path illuminated by the light of his own ambition. He dreamed not just of money, but of freedom, the ability to live without constant worry, to help his family, to explore the world beyond the cramped apartment and the busy streets that had defined his life for so long, and that vision pushed him forward when exhaustion weighed down his body and doubt whispered that it was impossible, reminding him that success was not a straight line, but a journey filled with obstacles, and those who reached the end were the ones who refused to stop despite the pain, despite the fear. Late at night, he would imagine standing in front of people who once doubted him, not with anger or resentment, but with quiet triumph, knowing that every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every small act of persistence had led him to that moment, and the thought alone was enough to keep him awake, writing, planning, and dreaming, because he understood now that a dream without action was just a wish, but a dream paired with relentless effort could move mountains. And so, he kept dreaming, bigger and bolder, letting imagination stretch beyond the limitations that poverty had once imposed, letting his mind wander to cities, opportunities, and possibilities he had never allowed himself to consider. Each vision fueling determination, each sketch in his notebook a promise to himself, and though the path was uncertain, though failure lurked around every corner, he knew that dreams were the first step toward earning everything, and that if he could take that first step, the rest would follow, not easily, not without struggle, but inevitably, because he had dared to dream when most would have surrendered, and that courage, fragile yet unyielding, was more powerful than any obstacle he would face in the days, weeks, and months to come. The days turned into months, and the months into a year, each sunrise marking another chance, another challenge, another small victory, and slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the man who had once wandered through life weighed down by poverty began to rise, not by luck, not by handouts, but by sheer determination, persistence, and the relentless pursuit of his dreams. Every failure along the way had become a lesson, every rejection a stepping stone, and every sleepless night an investment in the life he had imagined in the quiet hours of his struggle when no one else was watching. He had learned to master skills that once seemed impossible, to network with strangers who became mentors, and to take small risks that, when compounded, turned into meaningful opportunities, and with each success, no matter how modest, he felt a growing sense of empowerment that reminded him that his destiny was not defined by circumstance but by action. The first real breakthrough came unexpectedly. A freelance client he had almost given up on referred him to a larger project, one that paid far more than anything he had earned before, and for the first time, he felt the taste of what hard work and vision combined could produce. That small triumph ignited a fire within him, and he realized that the life he had dreamed of was not a distant fantasy but a reality that could be reached one careful step at a time. With this momentum, he started to diversify his efforts, balancing multiple streams of income, taking on new challenges, learning to manage resources, and gradually building a foundation of stability that had once seemed impossible. The cramped apartment began to feel less like a cage and more like a workshop, a laboratory for transformation, and even as he faced new setbacks, delayed payments, clients who disappeared, projects that failed, he never lost faith, because he understood now that setbacks were temporary and perseverance was permanent. As he grew more confident, he began to share his journey with others, mentoring friends who were struggling, offering advice, encouragement, and a vision of hope that they could follow, and in doing so, he realized that his success was not just about him. but about inspiring others to believe that they too could rise. That poverty and limitation were not destinies but challenges to overcome. His life transformed in ways both large and small. The apartment was upgraded, basic comforts replaced by stability and security, and the feeling of fear and desperation that had once haunted him every morning was replaced by purpose, clarity, and pride. He could walk through the city with his head held high, knowing that every door he opened had been earned through effort, grit, and unwavering commitment to the dream he had refused to abandon. The emotional weight of this journey was profound, because it was not just money he had earned, but freedom, self-respect, and the ability to help those he loved, to lift others as he climbed, and to prove, above all, that nothing, not poverty, not doubt, not fear, could stop a person who refused to quit. Every challenge that had once seemed insurmountable now appeared as a stepping stone, a necessary part of the journey that had forged his resilience and strength. The triumph was not just in reaching financial stability, but in the transformation of character, in the man who had been timid and uncertain now standing tall, confident, and capable. Someone who could face any obstacle with the knowledge that effort and belief could turn dreams into reality. His story became a testament to anyone watching that no matter where you start, no matter how impossible it seems, determination and action can create miracles from nothing. And on the day he finally looked at the skyline not as a distant dream but as the backdrop of a life he had earned, he smiled, a mixture of relief, pride, and quiet triumph washing over him, knowing that he had turned nothing into everything, not through luck, not through shortcuts, but through the power of dreaming big and following through relentlessly. And as he reflected on his journey, he realized the greatest lesson of all: success is never simply handed to anyone, it is created, earned, and built one courageous step at a time. And if he could do it, so could anyone willing to believe, act, and persist. The story of the poor man who had nothing and dared to dream everything became more than a personal victory. It became a symbol, a message, a beacon to viewers that the impossible is only impossible until someone decides to take the first step. Keep moving forward, embrace failure, and never stop believing. And in that moment, as the camera pans out to capture the city bathed in sunrise light, the text appears on screen: don't just dream. Act. Your nothing can become everything. The music swells, the hero shot lingers, and the message resonates: hope, courage, and relentless action can transform lives, inspiring anyone who watches to take control of their destiny and begin building their own path from nothing to everything.